Tony Stark was easily his own worst enemy. Given that he was also Iron Man, that's pretty impressive. But what if he set himself up to be everyone's worst enemy? It's hard to imagine an MCU without a Tony Stark, but thanks to some clues from the comics and movies, it might mean we don't have to. But it would also mean that we'd have to adjust to Tony being the bad guy, or at least another one of his creations. Once upon a time, there was a man named Tony. He was good-looking, charming, incredibly smart, and worst of all, he knew it. Then he got kidnapped and forced to build weapons in a cave with another really smart person who was also compassionate. Tony's heart grew 3 sizes that day. He made a suit of armor and went about privatizing world peace. Nick Fury would eventually introduce Tony to some like-minded pals, who would go on to defend the world from Loki and Thanos, but also from all the enemies that Tony made along the way. And there were a lot. So many that his young protege has been fighting them even while trying to mourn Tony's death. One of the enemies Tony made from scratch with the help of Bruce Banner and a fancy stone from space. Ultron in the comics is the signature villain for the Avengers. That one menace that never seems to be able to go away. The one whose evil plans always includes the line, "and kill those cursed Avengers." That's because, like in the movies, Ultron was created by an Avenger, though there it's Hank Pym. In the movies, though, Tony and Bruce create Ultron after a long weekend alone with the Mind Stone and the Jarvis program. Then the Ultron AI goes on the internet and decides to get rid of humanity. Where he thinks the cat videos are going to come from once his goal is accomplished, it's unclear. Turns out that the first saga's main villain was bigger than Ultron. It was Thanos, who counts everyone in the universe as his enemy, and Ultron was subjugated to a guest appearance. Building Ultron started a rift in the Avengers that was eventually driven home by a vengeful Sokovian EKO Scorpion commando named Zemo. For a super robot that only existed about a week or two, that's some pretty fair-ranging effects. He laid the groundwork for the Avengers breaking up, making them vulnerable when Thanos came to town, trying to complete his shiny rock collection. Though one of the hallmarks of Ultron from the comics is that no matter how hard they try, Ultron is never really gone. We got a hint of that in Homecoming when Peter starts rooting through old Avengers stuff and finds a red-eyed Ultron head. Red eyes usually indicate a prime Ultron as opposed to a clone. But there's another window for Ultron to return, or even for Tony to become the bad guy, and it's all down to the last snap and how it happened. That has to do with which suit of armor Tony was wearing. Tony, of course, always has the best suits. Even Thunderbolt Ross thinks so, and he pretty much hates everything. Tony's suits are always improving. He's gone from the crude flame-throwing suit made in a cave with Dr. Yinsen to a slick nanosuit that could be summoned by touching a pendant he wore where his arc reactor used to go. That particular suit is reminiscent of the so-called Bleeding Edge suit from the comic books. That storyline, which happened right around the time Iron Man was making his big debut in theaters, involved a Tony Stark who was down on his luck. Like his eventual movie counterpart, he had given control of his company up to Pepper Potts, but he had also run afoul of a Norman Osborn-controlled Hammer and was more or less broke. In order to get back on his feet and swinging as the invincible Iron Man, he visited brain pal Reed Richards and created a suit that could embed itself in his bones and respond to his own thoughts. When he had to face Magneto, he made the suit out of carbon nanotubes instead of metal. It was a pretty sweet deal. Now Iron Man had a suit that would respond to his every thought, acted as a second skin, and could always adapt to its changing environment. Even better, it was permanently carry-on luggage. Tony should have checked in with his apprentice, though, on the dangers of having a suit that seems to have bonded with you and become one with your thoughts. Chances are it could become obsessed with you. While the Bleeding Edge suit didn't ultimately become a techno-venom, the Mandarin was able to make it seem as if Tony had lost control of his own suit, forcing Reed Richards to extract and destroy the armor. The MCU Iron Man never met the real Mandarin, but there's still a path for the Bleeding Edge nanosuit to have one last laugh at the MCU's expense. It all comes down to that final showdown with the Mad Titan Thanos and how he was defeated. A past Thanos had followed the future Avengers through time collecting Infinity Stones so that he could appear in his future with a fresh Infinity Gauntlet and just scrub life entirely and start anew. With the most epic game of Keep Away ever filmed, Tony was able to strip away the Infinity Stones and form his own Nano Gauntlet, snapping away Thanos and his minions. Problem solved, right? Unfortunately, it took quite the toll on Tony. So what does that have to do with Ultron and Tony Stark becoming the big villain of the next saga? Well, it has to do with how Ultron was made in the MCU. Both comic book Ultron and MCU Ultron were made for more or less the same reason: to automate the process of saving the world. For Tony, he wanted to build a suit of armor around the world. It was a plan the rest of the Avengers weren't the biggest fans of, but even though it went spectacularly wrong the first time, Tony tried it again. This time it resulted in Vision, who was as good as Ultron was evil. So good, in fact, he was worthy of Thor's hammer. One of the things that both Ultron and Vision shared was a relationship with the Mind Stone. While Bruce and Tony knew it was just the glowy part of Loki's scepter and made people do stuff, it turns out it was a stone that contained the foundational energy of the entire universe. That'd be a really intense episode of Antiques Roadshow, huh? Whether it's a continuous connection to the stone or just the jolt from the God of Thunder, Vision ticked the box for good instead of evil. But the one constant is the combination of Stark, artificial intelligence, and the Mind Stone. Which brings us back to Endgame and that fatal snap. The energy from the snap was too much for the mortal Earthling Tony Stark, even in his most advanced suit of armor ever. Tony does, however, have a track record for making technology that can handle the power of the stones. In fact, the first gauntlet he built to bring back the Dusted was able to survive the snapping a lot better than the one made by Eitri, though both were available for just one last snap. Previously, the combination of Tony Tech and an Infinity Stone has resulted in Super Robot. This is Tony Tech, all the Infinity Stones, and Tony himself. Could this collection of factors mean that Tony will be part of a new Ultron? Some sort of Ultra Ultron? Huh? As the MCU moves forward, it finds itself once again in uncharted territory. When it started, the idea of a shared universe was a novelty, and only dabbled in with niche movies where aliens fight predators or 19th century adventure heroes form a league of extraordinary gentlemen. But nothing has sustained and developed as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the shared narrative that leads to Thanos and Endgame, and the highest grossing movie of all time. Yay! Now that the 11-year, 20-plus movie saga has finished, the question now becomes, how does that story continue to evolve while still maintaining a connection to the story so far? The Guardians of the Galaxy have at least one more story in them, and newcomers Black Panther, Captain Marvel, and Doctor Strange have only just begun. In the wings are the new arrivals, including the Eternals, Shang-Chi, Moon Knight, and She-Hulk. And that's before we get to properties that have come back home in the Mutants and the Fantastic Four. The big question mark, though, is who is the villain going to be? There's a poetic symmetry about having that villain being Tony. While much of what happened in the Infinity Saga was directly the result of Thanos' search for the stones, it was also caused by the hubris of Tony Stark, both good and bad. Iron Man good. AIM, Vulture, Mysterio, Whiplash, Ironmonger, Ultron bad. The biggest good, though, is Tony Stark kickstarting Nick Fury's Avengers Initiative. Tony putting on that suit and introducing himself to the world as Iron Man started the MCU. Chronologically, there was already a Captain America and Captain Marvel, and before all that, the Black Panther was defending Wakanda. But it was Tony's public display of superheroism that forms the band that eventually defeats Thanos. Having the second saga revolve around an evil Tony, or an infinity-powered Tony creation, would be an interesting connection between the beginning of the MCU and the future of the MCU. Of course, this also means that instead of moving forward, the entire MCU is stuck looking back, staking its next 11 years on the same star power that propelled its first 11. That's not very different from comic books in general, however. Spider-Man was created in 1964 and is still swinging around the pages of Marvel Comics as spry as ever. When Batman was created, cars were started by stepping on a button in the floorboards. But while comics are evergreen, even a shared universe can't make movies the exact same way. The MCU is in the same position it has put every franchise. How do you top Endgame? An evil zombie Tony Stark, or even a revived Ultron with a hint of Tony, might be an interesting spark of a villain, but it doesn't lead to that Endgame-style finale. Of the comic stories that does have a potential to top Endgame is Secret Wars, the story of an interdimensional, nearly omnipotent being deciding to solve all the who would win arguments at once by putting all the superheroes and all the supervillains in the same place and making them fight. The hitch is here, in order to have a Secret Wars, you need to have some baddies. A lot of early bad guys didn't make it to the end credits. Stain in his Ironmonger suit, gone. Yellow Jacket, a stain. Whiplash, he gone. Killmonger, killed. Mandarin, not even the real Mandarin. While Thor's brother keeps coming back, Hela and Malekith, yeah, they're not. There are a few villains still bopping around the MCU. Zemo's set to take on the new Captain America in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Ghost is out there looking for redemption. But if we're gonna get a Secret Wars, we need some bad guys. Certainly there are some great ones on deck, since you can't have a Fantastic Four without a Doctor Doom. And Secret Wars can't go horribly wrong with a Doctor Doom. But Secret Wars is a numbers game. An Ultron fueled by a corrupted Tony would make for an awesome centerpiece to that world of villains. However, it's hard to imagine from Iron Man's humble beginnings leading to something as epic as Endgame. So it's possible that there are new threats and stars that the MCU can build on. It's hard to remember that even Robert Downey Jr. wasn't the star he is now when he told the world he was Iron Man. That's how the nanosuit and the snap could have created a new Ultron or bad guy Tony Stark. Do you want Ultron to get another swing at being the bad guy? What'll be the glue for the next saga? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, Make sure to subscribe to CBR for the latest videos in your inbox. Thanks for watching. Now, go wash your hands.